Okay, great. All right, welcome everyone to the third of fourth in webinar series, Nip Livestock Disease in the Bud, Create Your Own Contact Tracing Program. And this is the GOAT edition. Our plan is to have the presentation last about 35 to 40 minutes with time during and at the end for questions. I'm Carol Delaney, Livestock Specialist at the State of Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, subsequently known as DACF. And we're fortunate to partner with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension Service to offer you this series. And Donna Coffin, the Extension Professor, is our gracious host on Zoom and recording this session for future access. We hope at the end of this presentation you'll be familiar with DACF and the Extension Animal Health staff and the web pages where you'll discover practical information, rules, and services. We also hope you'll leave with the intention of improving your management of livestock disease through a system similar to COVID-19 contact tracing. Let me have my colleagues at DACF who are presenting today introduce themselves. Carolyn?
Thanks, Carol. My name is Carolyn Hurwitz. I am one of the assistant state veterinarians. I am in the Division of Animal and Plant Health. I primarily focus on cervids and poultry, but we all do a little bit of everything. So we're all happy to participate in the GOAT edition of the Nip Livestock Disease in the Bud presentation.
Great. And Donna Flint?
Hi, I'm Donna Flint, and I work in the animal health as well with poultry health technician as well as the animal disease traceability technician.
Great. And Ann Lichtenwallner, who is the extension veterinarian at the Maine Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, will join us at a future series. Anyway, I'd like to have Donna Coffin do some housekeeping before we start.
Okay, I think most of us have been on the Zoom before. Just a reminder, as our speakers are talking, you can use the chat feature. Down at the bottom of the screen is a chat button. It will open up a window on the right of your screen, and down at the bottom of that window is a place that you can type in your question and hit enter, and everyone will be able to see it. And as you're looking at that, way over to the right, there are 3 little dots. And if you want to save any of the chat, you hit that, you can save the chat. And shall I launch the poll?
Yes, so we'd like to find out who's attending today. And while the poll is going on, I'll just do a short introduction to the series. We thought that the current focus on the pandemic and the control of the coronavirus causing COVID-19 was a good parallel to what livestock farmers have been doing for a long time. And it would serve to re-emphasize who the players are and the steps we take to prevent, follow, and contain disease spread. And it's so important to our food system. I'll admit I was a contact tracer for a while, talking to people who had been exposed to COVID-19. And so the players are, when you talk about contact tracing, are the federal level, the CDC in this case, and they inform us about the disease and how to control it. The second player are the states, the CDC, the healthcare system, and they're charged with monitoring the disease and trying to contain it. And 3, the infected individuals, the population, the doctors they work with, their families, they need to monitor how they are, quarantine if they need to. And so contact tracing is really an interplay between federal, state, and citizens, in this case, to work together to contain the disease so that commerce can continue and normal life can continue. So maybe keep this in mind as we go over the components of animal disease traceability and contact tracing.
And I'll share the results of the poll.
Mm-hmm.
One person has none and one has 1 to 10. Neither are using a current animal ID system. One takes animals to slaughter and one transports animals off the farm.
Great. All right. Okay, so we'll get going. I have to click. There we go.
Right. Awesome. Thanks, Carol, for that introduction. So for those of you that can't see me, if you're on Facebook, this is Carolyn Hurwitz. I'm going to be getting us started today, kind of picking up right where Carol left off. Carol did a nice introduction, built some context for us about human health. On the human health side, the contact tracing system as a response to this current pandemic. And so we're going to introduce a different federal program on the animal health side that's actually been in place for quite a long time. And this program has been in place as a preventative health measure for livestock. So this is a USDA program, which stands for United States Department of Agriculture. And the name of the program is Animal Disease Traceability, or ADT. So the purpose of this ADT program is to use information about animal movement to limit the spread of contagious disease. And again, this is on a national level. So Carol kind of broke down that we have a national responsibility. We work with our state partners, and then ultimately it's the actions of individuals that help to limit spread of contagious disease. So in this case, our federal partner is the USDA. This is a federal program. However, ADT is really implemented through the states. So if you have questions about how to participate in this ADT program, or why or when, your contacts really are the people here on this webinar. So your animal health staff can help answer those questions and connect you to the resources that you need. The USDA ADT program applies to all livestock, not just sheep and goats. We're focusing on goats today, but there's a couple little nuances of the ADT program that are specific to sheep and goats. So we're going to be sure to touch on that today and hopefully clarify some of that. The USDA program passed as an official federal rule in 2013. And this rule required identification and documentation of all animals moved across state lines. So that's kind of a minimum requirement for all livestock species. And both Donna Flint and I are going to talk about some of the more nuanced requirements for sheep and goats. If you're looking for information directly from the USDA about their program, you can click on this link here that's in these slides. These are available to you. If you click forward, Carol, this is just a screenshot of the landing page where you'll go if you do select that link. And so here you can find more information about the USDA's ADT program, as well as specific requirements for identification of sheep and goats. Thank you. And then the last link on this slide is to our website. So the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry. Within the Division of Animal Health, we have this webpage here, which is resources for the Animal Disease Traceability Program. This website has general information for all species, but also species-specific information. There's links to contact any one of us if you have any questions or need to reach us. Probably the most common reason producers may navigate to this page is for the link that says Main Premises Identification Number. If you'll select forward, Carol. That link is where you'll go if you need to request a premises identification number, or a PIN. This is also sometimes called a Prem ID. There's multiple names for it. A PIN or a Prem ID is a specific number that's associated with a specific location. That PIN number can be assigned to your farm. If you give us a call at DACF, there's no cost to have a PIN assigned to your farm. It's easy and it's quick, and you'll need this PIN number in order to acquire these identification devices for your animals. So I'm just introducing right now the location where you can request one of these PIN numbers, but Donna Flint is going to go into more detail about when you would request that and why. So for now, just keep in your mind that on the DACF website is where you can go to actually request this PIN number from us. You can also call us, but it's quite easy to do it this way as well. All right, forward. Thanks, Carol. So this ADT program, Animal Disease Traceability, recall that this program uses information to limit the spread of contagious diseases of livestock. So the information that we need is who is the individual animal and where are they going? So in order to identify an individual animal for this federal program, we have to select a unique individual animal identification number, and there are species-specific requirements for which types of ID are acceptable. On this slide, you can see a couple different types of ID that I've just included with pictures, though there are several other options specifically approved for goats, but I've picked just a few common ones here. So that top yellow clip is a very lightweight tag. It has a microchip in it, and that has an official federal individual animal ID number associated with it. The yellow kind of panel tag that you see below that one, that's another really common ID tag that's an official identifier for a goat. The official animal number is printed right on it. And in the top right, you can see a very well done registered tattoo. It's clear, easy to read, it looks really good. As long as there is compliance with the other components that are needed to use this form of ID, this is also a way to officially identify an individual goat. And again, Donna Flint is gonna follow up with this with a lot more practical specifics regarding individual animal ID. So this is just to get us started with what kind of identifiers are available that you've probably seen before. So these are just examples of official ID that are acceptable for goats. Number two is the other piece of information that feeds into this ADT program, and this is a record of animal movements. And this record of animal movement really documents the potential opportunities for an animal to be exposed to contagious disease. Because if they're moving off the farm, there's a chance that they're mingling with other animals and thereby possibly being exposed to contagious disease. And this is really where we can kind of draw the link between our current human contact tracing program and this animal health program that's been in place for a long time. So this contact tracing component really keeps a record of what individual animal has been at what location. And that's the point at which we would have exposures between different groups of animals. So that document on the right, I don't know, Carol, if you're able to kind of circle that, that document there is just an example of what one of these movement documents would look like. It's called a Certificate of Veterinary Inspection, or a CVI. A lot of people also call this a health certificate. This animal movement record is going to contain some very useful information. So each individual animal that is moving on this document is going to be recorded by their official federal ID. So that number is for that animal only. It's a national unique number. So we know that that individual animal started in one location, and this document will record where that animal went to. And the reason this is important is because, as an example, if an infectious disease is confirmed at location A, and the animals on this CVI have never visited location A, then we can be reasonably assured that they were never exposed to that contagious disease. The flip side of that is if those animals on the certificate either originated from or went to location A, then that would mean that they were potentially exposed. So that's how we get back to the contact tracing element of this program. So ADT uses this contact tracing strategy on a national level, but we're hoping that through this lecture we'll convince you that you can also use animal identification and movement records, keeping track of an animal's health history, to use the principles of ADT on your own farms to control disease risk on your own farm. And the USDA program is moving towards electronic documentation and sharing of information, which is accurate and fast. And so if you're going to be developing an ADT program on your own farm, if you don't have one already, you may consider also moving in that direction from the beginning. So on the bottom left, I've just picked out a couple of the platforms that can digitally share movement records, so those CVIs. In the middle, you can see an electronic reader. So you might use that to actually pick up the animal ID number on an electronic tag. And there's one all the way over on the right that's just a different type of reader that you can use to pick up an ID number. Next. Thanks. So I want to be sure to point out that for sheep and goats, not only are they part of the USDA's Animal Disease Traceability Program, but really the focus of ADT for sheep and goats is control of a disease called Scrapy. So I'm sure most people that have sheep and goats have heard of Scrapy. And all sheep and goats in the United States are participating in the National Scrapy Eradication Program. So this is kind of a specific program for sheep and goats within the larger ADT program. Scrapy is a fatal degenerative disease of the central nervous system. So as a degenerative disease, that means once symptoms start, it's progressive until death. And Scrapy spreads from animal to animal, and it can be spread by an animal that outwardly appears healthy. So it's not always easy to know if an animal is infected with Scrapy. Scrapy can cause significant production losses for infected flocks. So if there's an animal in a flock that's infected with Scrapy, they will shed that infectious agent into the flock, and soon you'll have more and more animals that are infected by Scrapy. And it's nearly impossible to get rid of this disease in a flock without whole flock depopulation, meaning to cull the whole flock. However, since 2003, through this ADT Scrapy Eradication Program, the number of positive surveillance samples in sheep and goats in the US has decreased by over 99%. And that's not just because the animal has a tag in its ear. It's because this ADT program and the action that you can take by being able to identify and trace an individual animal has led to fewer exposures of vulnerable animals to Scrapy positive animals. So because of this goal, sheep and goats need to have an ADT compliant identifier even before they cross state lines. So that's one of the nuances that I had mentioned a bit earlier that applies specifically to sheep and goats. So any goat that leaves its farm of origin needs to have an ear tag in before it can move to another farm. So even if a goat is born on farm A within Maine and moves to farm B within Maine, that transition needs to be accompanied by an ADT compliant ear tag. And that's because we want to identify that goat to its farm of origin. Scrapy is a disease that is most efficiently spread from birthing fluids. So lambing or kidding, at that time, there's contamination of the environment and exposure of other animals. So it's really important to know where that animal originated from. So for sheep and goats, they need to have an ADT compliant ear tag, even if they're not crossing state lines, but they are leaving the farm that they were born on. Forward. Thanks. So ADT for sheep and goats is very much focused on Scrapy control on a national level, but ADT and record keeping is also really helpful on your own farms for diseases that you may be more concerned about. So you can use individual animal ID and movement records to manage disease risks on your own farm. So we're going to use CAE as an example of a disease that you might either prevent from introducing to your farm or prevent from spreading within your flock using the principles of ADT. So we'll first start with asking and trying to see what your familiarity may be with CAE. If the poll can pop up, if anybody wants to take a guess of what CAE is.
I didn't make a poll for the CAE.
Okay, that's all right. So I'll just run through it because I do think we'll probably have some people on Facebook that can't vote anyway. So CAE, we've got a couple different options of what it stands for, and I will just cut right to the chase here. CAE stands for caprine arthritis and encephalitis. That's the name of the disease. And we'll introduce that now and hopefully convince you that you can use ADT to prevent this disease from entering your farm or spreading within your farm. All right, so like we covered, CAE stands for caprine arthritis and encephalitis. That's the name of the disease. The virus that causes it is just CAE virus. CAE is a type of lentivirus. Lentivirus is a family of viruses that includes a couple different types of viruses that affect different mammals. There's a lentivirus of sheep, OPP, if you've heard of that before. The lentivirus of goats that we're talking about now is CAE. HIV is actually a lentivirus of humans. So these viruses infect mammals, and they're generally pretty species specific. CAE can cause chronic joint disease in adult goats. It can also cause chronic inflammatory mastitis in milking does. So between these two things, chronic joint disease, which is quite painful, causes a lot of swelling, production definitely is decreased in adult animals. And young goats, you tend to see encephalitis, which ultimately will be fatal for that young animal. This virus is spread from infected goats to non-infected goats via bodily secretions that contain white blood cells. So white blood cells are a component of normal blood. So obviously contact with infected blood can spread this disease. You can also spread this disease by contact with milk that contains white blood cells that are contaminated with this virus. So most commonly, when this disease is spread through contact with blood, it's actually caused by human involvement with either reusing a needle, something like that, accidentally spreading this virus from goat to goat. More commonly, though, this virus is spread from an infected doe to her kids when they consume colostrum or drink milk, because the virus is actually in the milk. There is no vaccine for this virus, and an important feature of this virus is that not all infected goats are going to show symptoms. So even if a goat is infected with the CAE virus, you may not necessarily see encephalitis in a young animal or mastitis and chronic joint disease in an adult animal. So not all animals are going to show these signs of CAE. And this is important because if an animal doesn't look sick, then we're not going to know that we need to be careful with exposing it to a CAE negative herd. Forward. So what can you do to find out if an animal is positive for CAE if they're not actually showing you that they appear to be sick? This is where the principles of ADT come in. So one thing that we can do is test an animal for CAE. The most common way to test an animal for CAE, or to screen an animal for CAE that's outwardly healthy, is to pursue something called antibody testing. So this type of testing is looking for the goat's reaction to exposure to CAE at some point in the past. This testing is readily available, so most labs that perform diagnostics for small ruminants can do this testing. It's commonly included on routine biosecurity testing for sheep and goats. It is a blood test, so there's a little red top blood tube on the right there. It's an easy to collect sample. There are many different times that you could test an animal for CAE, and it really depends on what you already know about your herd or what management decisions you're trying to make. So as an example, if you already know that there's CAE in your herd, you might want to test the does before kidding so that you know if you have to remove the kids from the doe. If you are considering adding an animal to your herd from another herd with an unknown CAE status, you may want to test that goat initially and then a month or two later before adding them to your herd. So it really depends on what management decisions you're trying to make. But the point is that testing for this disease is readily available and it's easy to do. And if you do it, you want to be sure to keep a record of the testing that's been done. And that testing is really only meaningful if an animal has an individual animal ID, because then you can link that test result to the individual animal and then use that information to make your decisions to control your risk of disease introduction on your farm. Forward. All right, so we've talked about how to test for CAE. Hopefully I've convinced you that CAE is not a great disease to introduce to your farm. So if you're going to collect information about your herd CAE status or an unknown new animal, You can use this information to affect how you manage your herd. So I've just written a few examples here of what you can do with that information, knowing an animal's CAE status. First of all, anytime you're introducing a new animal, you certainly do want to quarantine. However, if you know an animal is from a CAE negative herd, if this is the main disease that you're trying to control, you may only need to test that animal once during its quarantine before introducing it to your herd. However, if you're not sure of an animal's CAE status, you're not sure of the herd status, you might consider an initial test for that animal, continuing to keep them in quarantine for 30, even 60 days, and then testing them again. The reason for that could be if that animal is early on in their exposure to CAE, they may not yet have developed the antibodies that are picked up on this test to let you know that they've been exposed. So they might need a little bit more time to develop those antibodies. And all of this information is something that a herd veterinarian would be able to advise you on based on your concern for CAE and the known status of your herd. If you're running a closed herd, you might consider routine CAE screening for your herd to make sure that they stay negative. Again, that's something that your herd veterinarian can advise you on. But if you're going to be running this testing, you do need individual animal ID to make that testing worthwhile. If you're considering purchasing in a breeding animal, you certainly want to know their CAE status. And again, that information should be linked to an individual animal ID. If you're purchasing an animal from another flock, they're going to need to come to you with official ADT tags as it is. So it should make it very easy to link that information. CAE is a chronic disease, and ultimately it is a degenerative disease, so it's going to cause chronic problems and ultimately lead to production losses and death in infected animals. It is definitely best prevented rather than treated. In fact, there is no treatment for this disease. So you can manage the risk of disease introduction or spread to your herd or within your herd by practicing these principles of ADT, which again are individual animal identification and record keeping. So health record keeping, movement records, all of that is useful information in making your decisions of what kind of risk an animal poses. And so in this example, I focused on CAE, but there are many other diseases of sheep and goats that can be effectively managed using these principles of ADT. So hopefully that's something that is either useful to you now or you're considering putting in place. And we're going to take a couple of questions, I believe, and then Donna Flint is going to follow up with some information, practical information about how to get ID tags and how to implement that on your own farms, both for disease control on your farm and if you're considering moving animals off of your farm.
Okay, we have a question. Can it be spread by semen or saliva?
CAE?
Yes.
So I don't believe that it's spread in saliva. So it's spread in white blood cells. So that's a good question. You can spread CAE with close direct contact between infected animals and uninfected animals, but it's primarily going to be spread in milk and blood.
And there was a question, can humans get CAE through the milk product? And it was responded, no, humans cannot get CAE.
Right. Yeah, good question. No, CAE is not spread to humans. And
then can wild deer get CAE?
Another good question. So there has been, so the short answer to that is I don't know, but there has been antibody testing done on wild ruminants that have tested positive for CAE, but it's unknown whether that's a cross reaction or that they're truly infected with the same strain of lentivirus that causes CAE in goats. Good question.
And that's it.
Awesome.
Hi, everybody. You ready for this?
Yes.
Okay, so goats are not as easily handled with Scrapy tagging as the other species as sheep. So initially, a Scrapy flock ID is obtained through the National Scrapy Eradication Program, and it's the Massachusetts number listed there that you would call. And then Gail will talk about the tags I believe there's still some metal tags that you can get for free, but a lot of people don't like to use the metal tags, so you would have to purchase your own tags. What happens when you're assigned a Scrapy flock ID is your farm is, you can either request an individual farm number like ORF, which Oak Ridge Farm is mine, but I don't think I want my tags to say ORF on them, so I didn't do that. I just got the general assigned numbers. So ME is the first 2 digits, meaning the farm is located in Maine, and it goes by the postal zip code. So you would get that as your tag, and then the next 4 numbers are the individual animal ID. So the tag that I have listed here, MEX0265, is my Scrapy flock ID number. And then the next 4 digits, 1, 2, 3, 4, or normally they start at 0001. That would be my individual animal number. So then the next item that you may have to get involved with is the premise ID or PIN number. It's a standardized unique identifier assigned by the USDA once the site is registered through your state. So in Maine, you would have to call the Department of Ag Conservation Forestry office here and request a PIN number. Or you can visit our website and go through the premise ID information. There's an online form that you can fill out. And Prem ID or premise ID is just identifies where the livestock were born on, raised, housed, or where they entered commerce. So if you're bringing any animals to an auction and they don't have a tag, then they will, the tagging auction will put a tag in the animal's ear and it'll be recorded. So an example for this Prem ID is 00BE4X9. That was, that's my dad's farm. That's where I had my animals. So I don't live at that address, but that is the number that I use because that's where the animals are housed at. And then in goats, the tattoo registry ID, a lot of people belong to the AGDA, American Dairy Goat Association, or I think there's another one, I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but you apply for your membership and you can submit a tattoo application at the same time, and then they give you up to 4 options of coding that you would like. And then if the 4 you request are already used or aren't valid, then they will assign you one and you have 30 days to change that. But that's the number you're going to be using on your registrations for part of your official ID. So what makes a tag official for Scrapy ID? So on this big yellow tag in the middle, there's, I have an arrow pointing to it's sorry, I'll go to the USDA shield first. So on each, the male and the female part, there's a USDA tag, US tag in the interstate sign there that means it's a US animal. And then there's an unlawful to remove statement on it, and I believe that's just on the male part. So if you've got a tag like that and you pull them apart trying to remove, then number one, the numbers aren't going to match. And if it's an RFID tag, you just broke the chip inside, so it won't read anymore. For the La Mancha breed of goats, or I hate when they say the goats without ears, because they do have ears, they just don't have external ears so much, but you have a collar system that you can use, but the collar has to be hooked up so that the white tag to the left of the picture there has to appear between the ring where you would hook a lead chain to and the end of the collar. And on the other side, it can't be in front of that buckle because then it makes it removable. So you need to make sure you apply that right if you're going to use collars for your tags. And then any RFID or that's radio frequency identification or electronic identification starting with the 3 digits of 840 is a official tag, and it will say on the button tag the US shield as well as unlawful to remove on the back tag. And it is 15 digits long. And then it also is the same number that would come up when you get a microchip for your animals. So it's a 15-digit, but it's all in that little microchip. So these are just some examples of choices you'll have. You have the plastic tags where you can, it says custom line there, so you could name your farm there, and then the individual animal number. Way over on the right is the metal tag that everybody's trying to get away from, I guess. Right now the markets are using that one because they're free. And then in the middle there, the small ruminant EID, that's actually a RFID electronic tag. I think it weighs less than an ounce, so it's really nice for sheep and goats because it's similar to the farm tags that you get, and you can just scan it into a database that you have. The button tag on the left is most commonly used for cattle and hogs. They do make a yellow one that's 840 as well. That's a little bit lighter, but you can use them for sheep if you need to. And then there's the microchip, and it's hard to find a picture of a good microchip, but they're a little bigger than a piece of rice. So, and you need a syringe to implant those in your animal. And there are guidelines where you need to do that on goats. It's usually at the base of the ear or in the middle of the tail, underneath the tail. So the goats also have an option, goat breeders also have the option of using their breed registration as a form of official identification. So when you want to register your goats in your breed registry, you have, like I said earlier, an assigned herd tattoo in the right ear, and then the individual animal number will be in the left ear or in the left tail flap. But you also must have to carry a copy of the registration with your animal during trucking, at shows, or at exhibitions. And you must have tattoos on the certificate of health form, or the CVI, as well as your registration information on the CVI. So when the vet comes, you need to have all this paperwork ready and make the vet write a lot. When you do a transfer of ownership on your registries, I believe you have 60 days so you need to record who's the new owner on the back, and then you have 60 days, I believe it is 60, to get the registration transferred over. If you go beyond that 60 days, and it's not valid anymore, and you have to start over. See, so complete information for all this on the AGDA website is very involved, and you can read it all you want. I read it for a few hours yesterday just trying to remember everything. I'd say the next slide, please. So to purchase RFID or electronic tags or microchips, you will need the Scrapy program flock number, which was the Massachusetts number you call. You'll also need to do a premise ID through the Department of Ag here, and that'll be entered into a national database. And once you have those both in the national database, you can purchase your tags from an approved tag company. What happens then, the company, say you call NASCO or PBS Animal Health or whatever, you put your order in, they'll ask you for those numbers, and then even while you're on the phone, they may call and check to see if those numbers are valid. If they have a problem, they will not ship your tags. And there's a website below for more questions that you might have on animal disease and the sheep and goat identification. Any questions? I feel like I went through that fast.
Well, you apparently were very clear. There are no questions.
I did want to say that if you happen to use microchips, then you do need to have a reader ready, which is anywhere from $30 to $300 that you can get readers. So if you're at a show and there's and you're using microchips, then you do need to have a reader available.
No question. You're good.
Well, I don't know if I'm good, but
Great job, Donna. All right, we'll trundle right along here. And now we've kind of worked our way up from federal to on-farm with animal ID. And now I'm just going to go over some things you already do, but to emphasize them, how it fits in here. So just like contact tracing. So this is about disease prevention on and linking record keeping with the animal ID. So if your animal moves, unless you have this information with you, it's not that helpful. And this information is also really helpful just if your animals stay on the farm for your veterinarians. So we've talked about animal ID, official ID, and farm ID. So what would you want to link to it? Other than you have a lot of production data that you want, maybe registration data, but um, you could, it would be great if you knew what group they were in. Like if you have doelings, like yearlings, then they're all in one group together, then you would, it'd be great if you could say they're in group A, whatever you want to call it. The age and the gender of the animal, date of birth, that's really helpful, not only to you, but to veterinarians and others. And also origin, what farm they came from. And I think Donna will confirm this, that if you bought them from a farm that has official ID, they keep that ID. And then their breeding records. Now, production records, you have a lot of those, but the weight of the animal, no matter if it's a dairy animal or a meat or a hair animal, the weight is so important because it shows your growth, if they're doing well. Also, it's useful for the veterinarians if they need to treat or you need to treat them to know the weight. And then you always would want to know, why did you cull them? They just weren't as good as the others, or maybe it's an indication of a underlying disease problem. Medical records are really important, as you know. Treatments received, tests and test results, and why did they die? It would be really important. Let's see. I am trying to, okay. Next, so here's some basics for biosecurity, which you probably already know and are doing, but I just want to encourage you to implement or to look at what you're doing already. So first would be to keep the nip, okay, stop the infections from coming into your herds. So what is who are coming onto your farm, whether it's a delivery, whether it's human visitors, who want to come and pet goats, whether it's other livestock, maybe you have someone lends you a buck to breed, or even wildlife. There can be some diseases shared by deer, as we've had questions about. So you want to know what's coming in and realize where you might get an infection. And you want to limit, if you can, off-farm travel by your livestock. Now, if you can't, if you're not all closed, then like I say, you show animals, or maybe you lend your buck out, then that you're going to then introduce some issues. So you need to know that and also record it. Okay, so what do you do when you get a new animal, or your animals have come back from being shown at the fair? Well, you isolate them. So you need to have, ideally, which I didn't know this in my, when I was an extension agent advising goat dairies, that they should have a separate building for isolation for either sick animals on your own herd or incoming, because you need to isolate. And as Carolyn pointed out, for CAE, 30 days and probably 2 months would be the best for you to isolate animals. Talk to your veterinarian and find out, depending what diseases you're trying to control or monitor, how long you should isolate them. They shouldn't share noses, so no fence touching. They shouldn't share feeding or water. They should be fed last, and you might even want your own boots or coveralls to go with people, yourself, or others who are caring for those animals. And then I say muck, meaning, okay, what do you do about the health and sanitation? Well, when you you might want to require foot baths coming in and out of the isolation area. And you also want to know what to disinfect the pens with in between, whether there's a sick animal or maybe an animal giving birth, or a imported animal. And then, there's a lot of information on this, but you don't always think about this going into farming, is that, what do I do when an animal dies on my farm? Well, there's information on carcass disposal using composting. So that would be good to try to think about where that would happen and how do you keep a compost pile going, or how to start one. The other thing about disease is try to minimize stress. And the only thing I'll say about management is bedding, water, and fresh air are probably the best things you can focus on in terms of the animal's health. And I know with COVID-19, they'll say it's not filtering the air, it's fresh air. And so that's really similar with most diseases in goats. Okay, so we want to bring this down to the farm and just summarize. Maybe you can take from this what parts that maybe you're weaker on, and just maybe get an emphasis when you about things you're already doing. So prevention, you can start with a simple map. You can either draw it of your farm, or you could get a Google map even and print that out, and then write down where there's access to your animals from visitors, from veterinarians, from feed delivery people, things like that. And then where would be the most hazardous place where people might bring in disease? Start with that, and then start putting up signs and telling them not to either to check with you or they're not allowed in that area. If you don't have an isolation area that's separate, that doesn't share that, then you might want to think about constructing one. And then when you're moving groups of animals anywhere, maybe you have 2 different farms, 2 different places, write that down, because there could be an exposure at another farm. Now, detection. This is obviously obvious to anyone, but basically if you have a group of animals, you have the head count. So say you got me to go and take care of your animals, you'd want to tell me how many are in this group. And then notice behavior. So here some fresh does who are on pasture and they're up and eating. All of them are, but there's one there that isn't. Maybe she's due, maybe she's not feeling well. So just taking notes, and when did it happen? What's the symptom and when did it happen? This will help your veterinarian find out, start diagnosing it. So write it down, take a picture, send a text, whatever gets the job done. Oops. And then you'll need to separate that animal in a quarantine area and then communicate. Whoever's taking care of them, say they have to take care of them last, separate clothing, boots, or a foot bath maybe in between, and discuss it with your veterinarian. If you don't have one, that's one of the things you could put on your list to do, because if you have an established patient relationship with a veterinarian, then a lot of times you can just text them, send them a photo, and they can help you treat the animal. Okay, so what's the take home? Contact tracing is virtually the same as animal disease traceability that we went over. Okay, whoops, there we go. So first start with animal identification and make sure that it's official. Okay, link that to some type of record keeping. This is just an example. Dairy Live is a program that's very flexible for many types of species. Start and continue to build your biosecurity plan. Have an established veterinary client-patient relationship. And then contact staff at DACF, or perhaps you'll talk to the diagnostic lab at the University of Maine to help you with testing. Do you have any questions?
No questions.
Okay, so if we could throw in the survey, if we have participants, to see if we've shared the information well or not.
Okay.
And after this, to keep you here, I have a resource slide and our contact information. So hopefully you'll stay and fill out the poll.
And some folks are having trouble clicking on the things.
Okay. Well, and if there are any questions, you can either open up the microphones or they can type in chat, whatever.
it looks like we don't have any. Oh, there we go. There's
Yeah,
some-
they're coming. They're doing it. It's just always takes longer than we want. Well, we got 3. All right. Great. Okay. Are we done with the poll?
Yeah, I stopped it and I'm sharing it.
Okay. Okay, so your reward for doing the poll is I just want to share these resources, and they'll be on the recording as well. So I looked around, and the American Goat Federation actually is a really good one-stop shop for goats, goat health, all the organizations like the APHIS, USDA, APHIS that Carolyn and Donna mentioned. They link to the American Veterinary Medical Association and many other great links there, and it's not too complicated. So I'd go there and look on some health resources. For official animal ID, we have our website where we have new videos showing you not only, again, reemphasizing official ID, but how to put them in the ears. So you can go there and watch the videos if you want a refresher or teach others. And we also have a list of large animal veterinarians in the state who have identified themselves that they deal with ruminants. And also, I also noticed the American Association of Small Ruminant Practitioners. If you go on their website, you can go find a vet. So that's a great resource. I would say also for biosecurity, going up to farm resources, the Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture website was developed for all livestock species, and it has great training videos and information, information about disinfectants. So that's a great place also to help you get your cabinet full of what you need. And then for record keeping, if you like paper, then there are plenty of farm record books for goats out there. But what I found in terms of electronic, which is the wave of the future and also easier, and you can do it animal side, is this Maryland Small Ruminant website. And they have about a list of 20 electronic sources of animal record keeping, from free to you can buy them. And the last slide I want to share is this is how you'd contact us if you have a question. And well, we thank you for attending today, and we hope you've learned something and feel comfortable contacting us with more questions anytime. And I hope you have a good day, and the next presentation will be on beef cattle. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And